Well, good afternoon, viewers. Today we have a 2010 Jeep Wrangler Sahara Edition. It looks like it's got the 3.6 V6, and it's here because the MIL is on. The money light is on, as Eric would say. Didn't mention any drivability symptoms, but we're going to scan it and see what code it has to offer. So the ECM or PCM reports a P1404 EGR performance, closed performance, P1404. Let's see if there's any freeze frame data associated with this. It might be under generic functions. Didn't see it in the codes menu, yeah. Generic functions, freeze frame data. It's currently on, so I would assume that it's a current code, but this one doesn't give you failure descriptions. Let's see if this gives you any kind of indication of how long ago this set. Sometimes it has mileage. Time since engine start was 1,130 seconds. So almost 20 minutes. Absolute load, vehicle speed, 6 kilometers an hour. Long-term trims and fuel trims are around 7-8%. Short-term trims are around 0. Closed loop. Engine speed 763 RPM. Well, that's of no use to us. So let's look at what causes this code to set. So I'm going into the Snap-on troubleshooter. Engine controls, code tips, P1404. Next, if this doesn't help, we'll look it up. Code set conditions. EGR flow or valve movement is not what is expected. A rationality error has been detected for the EGR open position sensor, 2-trip faults. Possible causes: excessive resistance in the 5-volt supply, EGR solenoid control circuit, EGR solenoid signal circuit, ground circuit, EGR solenoid, or PCM. I would expect it's the EGR sticking. EGR sensed voltage is 3.42 volts right now. That seems high. EGR position sensor is a wire unit similar to a TPS. Well, it's a potentiometer built into the EGR valve, which is not convenient to get to on this engine. It's at the back right corner of the engine. I'm going to look it up on Identifix. So here is some cases in Identifix, sets code P1404. Let's check this one. Most of them fixed by changing the EGR valve. Test the exhaust gas recirculation valve position sensor voltage. Normal values are as follows. Key on engine off, 4.2 volts. We had 3.6. At 30% duty cycle, the valve just starts to open. At 35% duty cycle, voltage is approximately 3.2 volts. At 50% duty cycle, voltage is approximately 2.2 volts. The scan tool should have an EGR system test built in, so the value can be run bidirectionally and commanded to various duty cycles. Well, let's have a look at that. So under system tests in the Snap-on scan tool, we have the EGR system test. Must be running to perform this test. I'm going to start it up. So it's running now. We're going to continue the test. Should be able to watch data parameters, EGR flow, EGR voltage. Right off the bat, it seems a little low. Well, this doesn't put command it to a percentage, it commands it to grams per second. It's definitely working. You can tell by the way it's running. Well, that's a pretty useless test if it doesn't command it to by a percentage. 100 grams per second, 200 grams per second, 400 grams per second. I'm sure if we command it to 400 grams per second, it's going to... Oh, the duty cycle is here. Let's watch that. So that's about a 50% duty cycle, 60% duty cycle. Well, it's definitely not stuck, but is it returning too high a voltage at rest? Because it's not being commanded on now and it's sitting at 3.4 volts. I'm going to look around. So here's the troublemaker chart for P1404 from the manufacturer. The set conditions are the EGR flow or valve movement is not what is expected. A rationality error has been detected for the EGR open position performance 2-trip fault. And it goes on to list a number of possible causes. Diagnose any repair EGR signal circuit high or low DTCs. We don't have those. Do not stand in direct line of the fan. Attempt to operate the vehicle in the condition. So they want to check to see if it's an active or pending code. In other words, clear it and see if the code comes back. Disconnect the EGR valve, disconnect C1 and C2 of the PCM connectors, measure with continuity on the ohm meter. Like, this is just, all this does is serve to increase the billable hours. Checking a wire for continuity for less than 5 ohms. Should be 0 if it has good continuity. I don't want to go to the PCM and start disconnecting connectors, especially because we know it does work. So I suspect it's, just tell me what the reading should be at key on, engine off, or at an idle. Sometimes they'll give you a flow chart or a chart that'll graph it, checking for the EGR solenoid battery power wire. We know the solenoid is good, we just commanded it on with the scan tool. Wow, no wonder it costs so much for technicians to diagnose things with following these troublemaker charts. So one of the steps in here, it says to install a breakout box, adapter harness 8815-1 to perform the diagnosis, because they want you to physically measure the voltage from the EGR position sensor right at the PCM, but they don't want you to backpin the PCM. So they want a breakout box, and I don't have that. Backpinning the PCM is not convenient. But here it says, with the scan tool, perform the EGR system test, select open to open the EGR valve, monitor the circuit voltage on the voltmeter. Is the voltage below 0.5 of a volt when the valve was opened during the system test? Well, let's see if we can do that. So here I'm going to command it to 400 grams per second, and we're going to watch the voltage. I'm sure it's going to stall. .7 volts. So it could be intermittently sticking because it's basically stating that the position of the EGR doesn't match the desired position of the EGR, but it doesn't tell you by how much it has to differentiate. Let's turn this off. So I'm going to discuss this with the customer. It's probably going to need an EGR valve. I'm going to clear the codes and take it for a road test. So I've built a custom data list, selected desired EGR. I wish it would show actual EGR, but it doesn't. EGR duty cycle, EGR sensed voltage, EGR flow, engine speed. And we're going to take it for a road test. I've cleared the code. And we'll We'll graph this data while we drive it and see if it sets the code again. Let's go for a road test. So I just came back from about a 10-kilometer road test. No check engine light. I recorded the data. I'm going to save it, or I've already saved it. Going to check for codes. Codes menu. Codes. I'm going to go into generic functions and check for pending codes. Display trouble codes. None. So whatever is set to put P1404 is not reoccurred. So we can't use that troubleshooting chart to diagnose it because it's going to end up changing the PCM. I wonder if you can get codes out of this by cycling the key 3 times. Turn the key off, turn the key on, off, on, off, on. Let's try it again. Normally it would come up in the odometer reading. Change oil. On, off, on, off, on. I guess this no longer does that. I was going to suggest the customer check it for codes. Change engine oil. 130,000 it says. Oh, there's the check engine light blinking. Should have tried that before I cleared the codes. Oh well, I'm going to give it back to the customer with the understanding that if the P1404 returns, we're going to be replacing the EGR valve. That looks like what it would typically be. Tell me what you would do. Thanks for watching.